Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
Sometimes corruption isn't motivated by greed. Sometimes it isn't motivated by power. Sometimes it's motivated by certainty. And there's a name for that. It's called noble cause corruption. Noble cause corruption occurs when someone commits an unethical or even illegal act because they believe the outcome they're pursuing is morally justified. Imagine for a moment that investigators became absolutely convinced John Andrew Stewart and James Finch were responsible for the Whiskey A Go Go firebombing. Imagine they believed those two men were dangerous enough that society could never risk seeing them walk free. Now imagine they lacked the evidence to prove it. If investigators then manufactured evidence, embellished witness statements, or fabricated confessions because they believed they were protecting the public, that would be noble cause corruption. The intention may be noble, but the conduct is not. Because the moment we decide that any means are acceptable in pursuit of a noble outcome, we've stripped away the very nobility we had hoped to preserve. The perceived good becomes indistinguishable from the evil it set out to destroy. And that's one of the central questions surrounding the Whiskey A Go Go fire. Not whether corruption existed, not whether the allegations were true, but whether the investigation sought the truth, or simply sought a conviction, because those are not the same thing. Over the past 7 weeks, we've explored an extraordinary story filled with organized crime, extortion, corruption, prison protests, secret codes, and more twists than a pretzel factory. We've examined evidence suggesting John Andrew Stewart and James Finch were involved in the planning of the fire. We've also examined evidence raising legitimate questions about whether the investigation told the whole story. If the investigation was incomplete, others may have escaped justice. If evidence was even partially fabricated, then every legitimate piece of evidence becomes harder to trust. And history may never know exactly who was responsible. And if both things are true, then the greatest victims weren't only the 15 people who died inside the Whiskey A Go Go. It was everyone left behind. For more than 50 years, families, survivors, investigators, journalists, and historians have searched for answers that remain frustratingly out of reach. Questions, it seems, were blessed with a far longer lifespan than the victims themselves. Today, we'll examine James Finch's extraordinary confession after his release from prison, the competing theories that continue to divide researchers, the 2021 coronial inquest that reopened old wounds, and finally, where we believe the evidence points after 8 weeks of untangling one of Australia's most enduring mysteries. Because whether you believe John Andrew Stewart and James Finch acted alone or acted with others, or maybe they became convenient scapegoats in a much larger conspiracy, one truth remains beyond dispute. 15 innocent people died, and after more than half a century, their families are still waiting for the whole story. This is the finale of Foretold, Australia's Whiskey A Go Go fire, right here on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and procrastinator extraordinaire. Yet somehow, I still cannot compete with the Coroner's Court of Queensland, a comparison I'll be explaining in painful detail in this episode.
And I still have yet to try a single bite of Vegemite.
If you're new here, welcome. This is the finale of our 8-part series on Australia's Whiskey A Go Go firebombing. We definitely recommend starting at part 1 to get the full experience, but hey, we're not here to tell you how to live your life. We are, however, going to encourage you to take just a second to leave us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast player. Those ratings and written reviews on platforms like Apple Podcasts are incredibly important for helping new listeners find the show. Think of it like putting your shopping cart back when you're done. It's a tiny effort that makes life a whole lot better for everyone else. We are also excited to announce that, at the time I scripted this episode, we have officially hit 80 ratings on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify. A special thank you to BritKissAM, or BritKissM, or we'll just go with BritKissAM, and PolyDoc93 for taking the time to leave us written reviews on Apple Podcasts. I actually didn't see those written reviews until a couple of weeks after they were posted because Apple apparently likes to keep me humble, but I promise I do check every single week. We are absolutely thrilled to have both of you along for the chaos. And thanks once again to Just Becky and Sophie Brown for hanging out with us in the comments over on Podbean. Those comments honestly make my day. As always, Crime to Burn will remain free wherever you get your podcasts, supported by ads. But if you'd like to help support the show financially and skip the ads while you're at it, we would love to have you over on Patreon. Patreons get every episode ad-free the moment it's finished, and somehow, I've managed to release the last 2 episodes on Saturday, which either means I've become incredibly disciplined or I've simply developed better anxiety. Time will tell. Our next sticker drop is coming up in October, and you'll need to be a Patreon member for at least 30 days beforehand to qualify, so if you've been thinking about joining, consider this your sign. You'll also find a link in the show notes to our spread shop if you'd like to pick up some Crime to Burn merch, and if you happen to stumble across us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, or YouTube, do us a favor. Like the post, leave a comment, save it, share it with a friend. Tell the algorithm you think we're cool so it'll introduce us to other cool people who might enjoy listening.
There's nothing morally wrong with lying to an algorithm.
And that's how independent podcasts grow, because we don't exactly have advertising budgets. What we do have are terrible sleep habits, 0 free time, and a completely unreasonable number of possum encounters. So your help genuinely means the world to us. And finally, don't be strangers. We actually read and reply to emails. Try getting that from one of those big, giant podcasts with a network. You can send us your case suggestions, episode feedback, fire stories, or your best procrastination tips and tricks at crimetoburn@gmail.com. We definitely wouldn't have had nearly enough chaos to justify 8 episodes of this case without the incredible research of Jeff Plunkett, author of The Whiskey A Go-Go Massacre, Murder, Arson, and the Crime of the Century. At a hefty 624 pages, it's an absolute treasure trove of rabbit holes. And if this case has captured your attention the way it has captured mine, I cannot recommend it highly enough. And we're working on something pretty exciting. If all goes according to plan, we'll be sitting down with Jeff as early as next week to talk about the Whiskey A Go-Go case, his years of research, and a brand new project he's working on that I think you're really going to want to hear about, so stay tuned. Now, when we left off last week, James Finch had just been granted parole after serving 15 years in prison. And as a condition of that parole, he was immediately deported back to his native England, where things once again went completely off the rails. Honestly, that seems to be the recurring theme of this case. Because almost as soon as he arrived at home, James Finch announced that he was finally ready to tell the world what really happened on that March night in 1973 when the whiskey burned. But before we get to Finch's extraordinary public statements, there's one important piece of the story I intentionally saved until now. Last week, we spent a great deal of time examining the allegations that Finch's confession had been fabricated by police. It's easy to dismiss those claims as nothing more than the protests of 2 convicted murderers insisting that they were framed. Except, they weren't the only ones asking those questions. Years later, experts examined Finch's alleged confession, and what they found was pretty fascinating. And it involves stylometry, which sounds like some sort of horrific merger between fashion and trigonometry. Fortunately, it's much less terrifying than it sounds.
Those are 2 things I don't understand at all.
Stylometry is a legitimate, scientifically grounded method of analyzing speech or writing patterns to assess an author's linguistic style. It's frequently used to help attribute or rule out authorship of disputed documents. For example, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've probably noticed that I'm particularly fond of prolific alliteration. That doesn't mean every script I write contains alliteration, but it's one of those little habits that tends to show up over and over again. Stylometry looks for exactly that kind of recurring habit. Things like word choice, sentence length, punctuation, grammar, common phrases, and other very subtle parameters that most writers don't even realize that they have. Researchers then use statistical models to compare those patterns against known examples of a person's writing or speech to determine how closely they match. Now, this isn't mathematical proof. Stylometry works in probabilities and not absolutes. For example, if you compared this script to the collected works of William Shakespeare, the analysis would almost certainly conclude that Shakespeare did not write Crime to Burn. On the other hand, if you compared the writing styles of Stephen King and Dean Koontz, the analysis would likely find they share more stylistic similarities than either does with Shakespeare. That doesn't mean they write similarly enough to be mistaken for each other. It simply means writers working in similar genres often have more overlapping linguistic characteristics, making them more alike than completely unrelated authors. And stylometry sort of scores that level of similarity. And that's exactly what researchers wanted to know about James Finch's alleged confession. Did it actually sound like James Finch, or did it sound like someone else? So in 1984, an internationally recognized expert in stylometry examined James Finch's alleged record of interview and compared it to the transcript of Finch's testimony during his trial. And what he found was fascinating. According to the analysis, Finch's speech had several highly distinctive characteristics that appeared consistently when he testified under oath. For example, at one point on the witness stand, Finch said, and this is a direct quote, "I never done that or any of them." Now compare that to the language found in his alleged confession. Quote, "Gentlemen, I want you to understand my position." Unquote.
No. No.
Those don't exactly sound like the same person. Now that's just one example, and taken by itself it doesn't really prove very much. But stylometry is looking for dozens, sometimes hundreds, of little patterns that most of us don't even realize we're using. Take something as simple as the phrase, "the money" versus "money." One person might say, "I was trying to get the money out of them," while someone else might say, "I was trying to get money out of them." Both sentences mean exactly the same thing. But people tend to develop unconscious habits about whether they include little words like "the," and those habits become part of their linguistic fingerprint. According to the stylometric analysis, Finch rarely used those kinds of constructions when he spoke. His alleged confession, however, used them over and over and over again. When the researchers analyzed the confession as a whole, they concluded that there was only about a 1 in 236,472 chance that the wording reflected James Finch's natural speaking style.
That's a very specific number.
To put that into perspective, the National Weather Service estimates that this is roughly equivalent to your odds of being struck by lightning in a single year. Now, that doesn't prove the confession was fabricated. Stylometry can't tell us who wrote it, but it does suggest something important. Whoever composed that confession did not speak like James Finch. And remember, this wasn't the only challenge to the confession's authenticity. One police officer was later alleged to have told a journalist that the confession had, in fact, been fabricated. According to that account, investigators believed Finch and Stewart were guilty, but because they lacked the evidence to prove it, they also believed a jury would be far more likely to believe 6 police officers than a career criminal. In other words, the ends justified the means if it secured convictions, the old noble cause corruption argument. If that allegation is true, it raises profound questions about the integrity of the investigation. But allegations, even serious ones, still have to withstand scrutiny in court. When Finch's legal team appealed his conviction using the stylometric analysis, arguing that the language of the confession was inconsistent with Finch's own speech patterns, the court ultimately rejected the appeal. But as we discussed last week, Finch was eventually paroled and deported back to England. Remember, while he was in prison, he had married one of his supporters, a woman named Cheryl, and she joined him in England after his release, but not for long. Cheryl soon returned to Australia alone. Finch later described their brief marriage as, quote, worse than all of his years in prison, unquote. He claimed that he had actually only married Cheryl because he believed her illness would claim her life before he was ever released, and he did it as a, quote, act of charity, unquote.
What? Oh, I didn't think she'd be alive very long, you know. And, man, she drove me crazy.
She divorced him. Good girl.
She divorced him. Yes.
But that wasn't the most shocking thing that happened after Finch's release. You see, Finch maintained contact with reporter Brian Watt. And one day, Finch reached out with an intriguing proposition. He said that he was finally willing to tell the truth about what had happened, if Watt could sell his story to the highest bidder. Rather than shop the story around, Watt assembled a film crew and traveled to England himself. And in October of 1988, the cameras rolled. And for the first time, James Finch gave his version of what really happened. According to Finch, John Stewart had orchestrated the entire Whiskey A Go-Go fire as the opening move in a protection racket. Stewart had introduced Finch to Billy McCulkin and another man named Thomas Hamilton. Remember Billy McCulkin? He was the husband of Barbara McCulkin, who along with her 2 daughters would later disappear. Finch claimed that on the night of the fire, McCulkin drove while Hamilton and Finch rode in the back seat. McCulkin stopped outside the club. Hamilton and Finch carried the fuel drums inside, ignited them, and within seconds were back in the car and gone. But Finch's allegations didn't stop there. He claimed Stewart himself had been taking orders from Vince O'Dempsey, one of the men later convicted of murdering Barbara McCulkin and her 2 daughters. And then came the most explosive allegation of all. Finch claimed that Vince O'Dempsey had been working with police officer Tony Murphy. The interview aired on October 31st, 1988, and the video sold for $40,000. Finch was expecting a payday. Instead, he was told that the money had been completely consumed by the production and travel expenses and there would be no windfall. And James Finch did not take that very well. But the press was not done with James Finch. On November 1st, 1988, just one day after his story broke, Jana Wendt interviewed Finch on A Current Affair. And during that interview, Finch initially stood by his confession, until Wendt pointed out something that poor James Finch had apparently never considered. You see, Finch had only been convicted of a single murder. His trial had focused solely on the death of Jennifer Denise Davey. So Wendt asked him a simple question. Why aren't you worried that Queensland would extradite you back to Australia to stand trial for the other 14 murders? Finch looked stunned. He had not realized that he could still be charged with the other 14 murders, and suddenly his confidence evaporated. He began stumbling, and he said, quote, "I can't remember saying this. I haven't been very well. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea. I don't know what's happening to me, but I didn't kill anybody. I'm not guilty. I've done 15 years of my life in Australia for a crime I didn't commit. I'm innocent of that charge. I never confessed." Unquote. That right there is what you call a butt-puckering moment. Imagine realizing in real time on national television that the interview you gave yesterday didn't just make headlines, it may have just exposed you to prosecution for 14 additional murders. Public reaction was swift. Many argued that Finch should immediately be extradited back to Queensland to face 14 more counts of murder and potentially perjury charges as well. But Finch wasn't the only one who suddenly had a problem. Because if Finch's televised confession was true, then he had just accused at least one police officer of participating in the conspiracy. And there was still another problem. Why was this story so completely different from the confession that 6 Queensland police officers had signed and testified James Finch gave back in 1973? You see, if Finch was telling the truth now, if this was really what happened, then it didn't match the confessions presented at trial. But if Finch was lying now and his original confession had been fabricated as he claimed, then 6 police officers had testified under oath to a confession that never existed. Either way, people were beginning to ask the same uncomfortable question. Have 6 Queensland police officers committed perjury? And it was in the immediate aftermath of Finch's televised confession that one of the officers involved with Finch's interrogation was alleged to have told the journalist that Finch had been beaten and that his confession that was presented at trial had been completely fabricated. According to that account, investigators believed Finch and Stewart were guilty, but because they lacked the evidence to prove it, They made it up, believing a jury would obviously believe 6 police officers over a career criminal. The old noble cause corruption argument. Stories about organized crime, corrupt police, and James Finch dominated the headlines. Some officers even filed defamation suits against journalists that were reporting on the allegations. It was not a comfortable time to be a Queensland police officer, especially one whose name appeared on James Finch's confession. Because even if Finch was guilty, exactly as he'd confessed and then later recanted, the confession introduced at trial didn't match the version of events he gave reporters. And the timing. Oh, the timing. All of this unfolded in October and November of 1988, right in the middle of the Fitzgerald inquiry, which ran from 1987 through 1989. So Queensland was already under an intense microscope. Allegations of police corruption, fabricated evidence, and organized crime connections dominated the headlines. Then along came Queensland's most notorious parolee publicly claiming that corrupt police officers had helped orchestrate the Whiskey A Go-Go fire and were pulling the strings behind Brisbane's criminal underworld.
So he's trying to say that not only did they try to force a weird confession, that they were actually involved with it? Does that part track with you at all?
Oh, I'm going to explain it all.
Okay. Oh, I hadn't really considered that.
So whether James Finch was finally telling the truth or simply telling another story, he had just poured gasoline onto an already raging fire. And somewhere in Queensland, I imagine that antacid sales were absolutely going through the roof. And you might be thinking back to that first fire, the one at an empty nightclub called Torino's, because Jon Stewart had predicted that fire too. Well, decades later, a member of the Clockwork Orange gang admitted that he and other gang members had carried out the Torino's fire. According to his account, Vince O'Dempsey and Billy McCulkin had hired them to burn the club for the insurance money. Now, let's talk about the theories, because it certainly seems convenient that James Finch's post-prison confession involved many of the same names, the same gang, the same organized crime figures. Jon Stewart had connections to those same people and somehow possessed enough inside knowledge to accurately predict both fires before they happened. But there's a catch, because if Torino's and the Whiskey A Go-Go were both set by the same people, the motives don't seem to match. According to the gang members' confession, Torino's was an insurance job. But by the time the whiskey burned, that business had already gone into receivership. Control of the club had passed to an outside receiver because of its financial troubles. On the surface, that would seem to rule out insurance as a motive, except it's not quite that simple. Because the Littles, the owners of the Whiskey A Go-Go, did receive some insurance money after the fire, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover all their debts. And by the time that the whiskey burned, the club had actually begun to turn a profit again. Burning a business that finally appeared to be recovering just to reduce outstanding debts doesn't immediately make much financial sense. So if not insurance, then what? Well, one theory suggests that Stewart and Finch were simply being used by members of the Clockwork Orange gang to establish a protection racket in Brisbane. In Finch's post-parole confession, he specifically named Queensland police officer Tony Murphy as the man pulling the strings. Murphy was accused over the years of operating protection rackets and extorting businesses, allegations which he did consistently deny. And another theory focuses on the whiskey's former manager, John Hannay. Hannay had been fired amid the allegations that he had embezzled money from the club, and some have suggested that maybe he orchestrated the fire out of revenge. But even that theory has a problem, because the fraud investigation that might have documented the alleged embezzlement never got off the ground because the whiskey's financial records were destroyed when Hannay's restaurant Alice's burned. Just another remarkable coincidence, in a case that seems to collect them. Hannay was also known to have ties to members of the Clockwork Orange gang and had reportedly been seen with both Vince O'Dempsey and Jon Stewart in the weeks leading up to the fire. And while revenge is certainly one of the most common motives for arson, murdering 15 innocent people seems like an extraordinary escalation over losing a management job. That said, Hannay would later go on to have a remarkably successful career involving fraudulent schemes. Jeff Plunkett's book explains that history in far greater detail than we can cover here. Still, others have suggested that the Whiskey A Go-Go itself was never really the target, and John Stewart was. According to this theory, Stewart's close relationship with Detective Basil Hicks, combined with his inability to stop talking to police, journalists, and just about anyone willing to listen, made him a liability. If Stewart knew too much about corruption inside the Queensland police force, framing him for the whiskey fire could permanently silence him while discrediting anything else he might later say. Then there's the theory that Sydney organized crime figures ordered the fire in order to devalue Brisbane's nightclub district, allowing them to step in and buy the clubs and prime real estate at bargain basement prices so they could expand their own operations into the city. And finally, some have suggested the Sydney syndicates ordered the fire because the whiskey's owners refused to cooperate with their efforts to take over Brisbane's nightclub scene. So which theory is right? Well, I wish I could tell you, but the truth is, every theory explains some of the evidence, but every theory leaves other pieces behind. More than 50 years later, no one's managed to assemble every piece of this puzzle into a single picture that fits. And that's why we're still talking about the Whiskey A Go-Go more than 50 years later. And the talking, it's not over. Because beginning in 2021, Queensland convened a new coronial inquest into the Whiskey A Go-Go fire, and somehow the hits just keep coming. Because this inquest introduced yet another theory. According to testimony from former immigration investigators, the Whiskey A Go-Go wasn't burned over insurance, and it wasn't burned to establish a protection racket. It wasn't burned because of revenge, and according to their testimony, it was burned because of heroin. The investigators testified that the Whiskey A Go-Go was allegedly being used to recruit young women to act as drug mules, moving heroin into Australia.
Oh, this is new information, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't sleep on that, right?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
According to that testimony, the real problem wasn't simply that drugs were being moved through the club. The problem was who was making money from them. One of the immigration investigators alleged that disgraced Queensland police officer Roger Rogerson, incidentally one of the officers who signed James Finch's confession, had become jealous because the whiskey's drug operation was interfering with his own alleged criminal enterprises. According to this testimony, threats were made, and the message was simple. If the whiskey didn't stop, the club would be burned. And those threats were apparently taken very seriously by immigration officials. So seriously that the immigration officers responsible for protecting confidential informants testified that they formally warned the Queensland police about the threats before the fire. According to their evidence, nothing happened. And one immigration investigator even testified that the officers who passed along the warning feared that the Queensland police might not act because, quote, they didn't trust the Queensland police. Neither did anyone else, it seems.
I can kind of see why.
By this point, this was beginning to sound like a recurring theme. Roger Rogerson, of course, had an answer for all of this. He denied it. You see, Rogerson testified before the inquest by video link from prison. He denied any involvement in the Whiskey A Go-Go fire. But why was he testifying from prison? Because he was serving a life sentence for the 2014 murder of a drug runner named Jamie Gow. And it wasn't his first conviction either. Earlier in his career, Rogerson had also been convicted of perverting the course of justice and lying to the Police Integrity Commission. The inquest also heard extensive testimony alleging that creative writing had become something of a specialty within the Queensland police force during the era of the Whiskey A Go-Go fire.
Creative writing.
Mm-hmm. Former officers testified that many confessions were fabricated.
Was there a special class they had to attend, or? Apparently
not, or they might have actually fashioned the confession to sound like the person.
Oh, they could have been good writers. If
yeah.
Yep, here's to that.
When you're writing, character voice is important. Witnesses also testified that sometimes statements were altered, that evidence was allegedly suppressed, and the allegations just keep coming because the inquest also revisited the murders of Barbara McCulkin and her two daughters. Vincenzo Dempsey and Gary Dubois had ultimately been convicted of those murders. During those prosecutions, the Crown alleged that Barbara McCulkin knew that Stewart and Finch had been set up to take the fall for the Whiskey A Go-Go fire and had intended to expose other conspirators, including the members of the Clockwork Orange gang. O'Dempsey was called before the inquest. He refused to take an oath or an affirmation, and all he did on the stand was deny any involvement. Gary Dubois, however, never had the opportunity to testify for the inquest because he died in prison just 1 week before the inquest began, which prompted a completely separate inquest into whether he had taken his own life just to avoid being questioned about the Whiskey A Go-Go fire. The coroner ultimately found insufficient evidence to support that conclusion. Several civilian witnesses also testified that police intimidated, threatened, and verbally abused them in an effort to get them to change their statements after the fire. One witness said she originally reported seeing 3 men outside the whiskey. She later alleged police showed up at her home demanding she change her statement to say there was only 2 men. Another witness, who was actually a police officer herself, testified that she had also reported seeing 3 men. She said that she too was pressured to change her statement but refused. And then her original statement was mysteriously lost. The inquest also heard evidence that police had suppressed intelligence regarding the possible involvement of Sydney organized crime. Some testimony alleged that Lenny McPherson, the very same Lenny McPherson John Stewart had warned police about, had been working with Roger Rogerson to position Stewart and Finch as convenient fall guys while concealing an international heroin trafficking operation. If true, that's a pretty astonishing allegation. But if you're waiting for the ending, get comfortable, because so is everyone else. The new coronial inquest was ordered in June of 2017. The public hearings began in June of 2021 and continued all the way until May of 2022. And since then, everyone has been waiting. The coroner adjourned the proceedings to prepare his findings, and as of today, they still have not been released. 4 years. 4 years later. That sounds like an incredibly long time, but then again, this case spans more than half a century. Witnesses have died, evidence has disappeared, files have gone missing, and the allegations reach into organized crime and the very police officers entrusted with investigating the fire. So, what do I think? If I had to place my chips on one explanation, it's the drug mule theory that emerged during the inquest. Not because it's proven, it isn't, but because to me, it answers more questions than it creates. It provides a motive. It explains why repeated warnings about the whiskey were allegedly ignored. It explains why police would allegedly allow Stewart and Finch to take the fall. And it explains why so many different pieces of this case, from organized crime to corruption to the Clockwork Orange gang, seem to all converge in one place. If that theory is correct, then I do think Stewart and Finch were involved, but not as the masterminds. I think they believed they were participating in one crime without realizing they were being positioned to take the blame for something much larger. But that's only my interpretation. You've heard all the same evidence I have, so what do you think happened? And before we end this series, I think it's time we acknowledge something. We have spent 8 episodes talking about police corruption, organized crime, kangaroo attacks, penis tattoos, tactical tennis balls, finger amputations, wire crosses removed from digestive tracts, and all of the other bizarre twists surrounding this investigation. And we had to, because without understanding the insanity surrounding this case, it's impossible to understand why people are still debating it 53 years later. But we've been looking at the wrong end of this tragedy, because 15 people never came home. Jennifer Denise Davey, age 17. Darcy Thomas Day, age 19. David John Westron, age 19. Leslie Gordon Palethrope, age 20. William David Nolan, age 21. Colin William Falster, age 22. Peter Franciscus Morcus, age 23. Wendy Leanne Drew, age 24. Carol Ann Green, age 26. Paul Ferdinand Zoller, age 26. Desma Selma Carroll, age 29. Desmond John Peters, age 31. Brian William Watson, age 32. And Ernest John Peters, age 50. They were the victims. And who were the perpetrators? John Andrew Stewart? James Finch? Perhaps members of the Clockwork Orange gang? Perhaps corrupt police officers. Perhaps figures within Brisbane's criminal underworld. Perhaps all of them. We'll have to wait for the coroner's findings to know whether history finally has an answer. But there was one perpetrator we can identify with absolute certainty. The building itself. A building without sprinklers. A building without a fire alarm. A building with sealed windows. A building without an emergency plan. A building where combustibles, including used cooking oil, were stored in an exit corridor. A building whose emergency exit wasn't properly marked. A building whose final escape route led into a locked courtyard. This tragedy wasn't caused by just one failure. It was fueled by organized crime, enabled by negligence. And if the testimony presented at the inquest ultimately proves true, it was denied justice for decades by corruption. This has been Foretold, Australia's Whiskey A Go-Go Fire, on Crime to Burn.
It's got bits of real panther in there. That's how you know it's good.
Yeah.
I make magnificent mini meat muffins.
I completely forgot about the mini meat muffins.
I did, and I've gained a couple of pounds on the meat muffins.
I have never eaten a rice puff. Why is it that everyone says that if you're trying to lose weight, you should eat less rice and use like riced cauliflower or...
Those carbs.
Right. But if you're trying to lose weight, what's the number one diet food people talk about? Rice cakes.
Yeah, but they're like mostly air. They're air cakes, really, with like a slight ricey membrane.
They're disappointment cakes.
Yeah, they're sad cakes for sure.
So I haven't had to rescue any bags of animal food from possums this week. We're not meant to understand the ways of the cats. I know, this one's been a long one, and you don't really like long series like this, so you've hung in there very well.
I didn't fall asleep one time or throw anything.
From penis tattoos to spring-loaded wire X's being removed from people's digestive tracts to kangaroo attacks and...
I'm frankly surprised more things didn't go in that dude's butt. How can we help society not be like this?
Well, I think where things started to go wrong was the horrific abuse in his childhood home.
Oh, yeah. Hey, quit abusing kids, assholes.
But because he's in Australia, it's going to have to be late at night. Because, like, late at night for us is, like, 8 to 10 a.m. for him. So it's going to be past your bedtime by a lot.
Just prop me up with a beer like Weekend at Bernie's.
But then next week, the week after that, we are starting a new series where laying hands on people may be a theme.
They'd be slapping fools.
Some of these fools should have been slapped, but instead they were calling it blessings.
Oh, I think you're supposed to make air quotes when you say that.
Blessings.
There, it's better. I haven't felt all the way awake in a while.
I've committed recording studio sin. Forgive me, producer, for I have sinned. And that's not even addressing what I've done to the mic, to the cord on my headphones. My cord embarrasses you?
Yeah. Come on, man.
It
looks like someone took an old Band-Aid and touched it to my gear. Are you going to get another slinky cord?
Yeah.
Can I have one too? Because you broke my other one too.
Well, it's not my fault the cords can't stand up to me.
Yeah.
Like my cord's thick.
You could measure that, I guess.
We'll go get my calipers.
It needs to be 3 times this size.
What is this? A headphone cord for ants?
Why did you sound British or something?
I don't know. So you don't know how to interrupt yourself? Or interrupt yourself? Introduce
No, I've done plenty
yourself.
of that. I'm pretty good at that.
You can introduce yourself with something about being noble. We're going to talk about...
Like gas. What's the opposite of noble?
Ignoble? I don't know.
The ignoble gas. They can't see the side eye.
We've forgotten to breathe.
Oh dear. Wow, I didn't even see an opening for me.
Now I'm hot. I was cold.
You've been hot this whole time, baby.
One police officer was later alleged to have told... That's my belly.
No, it ain't.
What is it?
It's like a whistling, like a wind sound, like wind through the trees, like a howling wind.
I'm telling you, it was my belly.
It's so empty. There's a wind sweeping through it.
No, I just had a lot of protein.
No, I'm hearing.
It was my belly. I swear.
There wasn't a child upstairs?
No, that's my belly.
That sounds like it needs help. I'm afraid of you now.
There it goes.
That is it. Holy crap. I thought that was in a whole nother room.
Sorry. Maybe I need to eat a lower protein breakfast on recording day.
I was like, I keep getting this and it ain't windy outside. Like, it sounds barren. Like there are tumbleweeds blowing around in there.
I assure you it's not barren in there. Yeah, some of the stuff that we learn, we won't learn until the 2021 inquest. But
so I got to wait like 6 years ago. Your poor digestive system is confessing. Don't make a bunch of illegal heroin. Like, these are things people shouldn't need to be told. You want to have an English sparring session?
A session?
I can't even speak English. You want to give me a good tongue lashing? I mean, you want me to give you a good tongue lashing? What is this guy's fascination with Australia anyway?
He's Australian. He lives in Sydney.
Well, that clears everything up for me.
Sounds like I swallowed a trumpet. Maybe a saxophone.
This episode's brought to you by an unreasonable amount of possum encounters.
They hiss.
Well, I don't care about that. Like, I've kissed a lot of people that hiss. No big deal. Thanks for stopping by the True Crime Show with Afterglow. That's the outtakes at the end, you know. You fuck them in the eardrum the whole time. You're just like, kick the trauma. Just take it. And then at the end, you get to cuddle.
The outtakes are how we cuddle with you.
Yeah, that's how we spoon you. You're the little spoon.
I don't know how to do heroin. I've never tried.
I have seen movies. All right, well, release me.
Okay.
But no matter how sweaty that ass gets, I'll still spank it for you.
Thanks. All right.
Oh, you see that ass wobble. Whoa! Send me some Vegemite. What the hell's wrong with you people?
Yeah, I mean, you think you can buy some on Amazon.
Really?
Let's find out.
Is it going to be the real shit or is it going to be some clone Vegemite? How do you authenticate Vegemite?
Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon. $8.69. Unless you want squeezy Vegemite, which is $11.37.
Damn, they really charge you for the convenience, don't they?
Anyway, we could order Vegemite and have it delivered Prime tomorrow.
It would be more special if an Australian sent it to me.
8 weeks of a case down under.
Where people lie and cops sell heroin. Can you see their human trafficking? This is a fucked up thing to talk about, but we gotta keep talking about it so people quit doing it. Please fucking stop it. My soul is weary.
I told you about the time I was in a meeting and I thought I was on mute and I wasn't. And so they're going around the room introducing, and this one guy, I'm just going to make up a name because I don't remember what his name actually was, but he was like, my name's Christopher Williams McFarland Price or something. Like, it was like 4 names.
That was a good spitball right there. Good job.
It was like 4 names, which seemed excessive when everyone else was like I was like, I'm April, I'm the fire protection engineer. I didn't even use my last name. And she's like, you know, he said all 4 names, and thinking I had remuted my mic, I went, my name is Dave. And everyone in the meeting cracked up. And that is the day I learned to always make sure you're on mute.
Can we just quit being assholes to each other?
Apparently not.
You know, the best rat poison is 99% good rat food.
All right.
Do it, hit the button. Do it, touch it.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Hey, true crime and dark history fans. This is Diego, the host of Lore and Crime. If you enjoy eerie folklore and real mysteries, you have to check out my new show. In each episode, we unfold a forgotten murder or haunted legend in a narrated short novel form. Don't miss the next original tale. Subscribe to Lore and Crime wherever you get your podcasts.